Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. You are actually officially now my third person, so we're getting close to that magical number 10 for me. And with that, I wanted to see if you wanted to go ahead and just introduce yourself just quick.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about you, right?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Dominic Foster. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started multiple companies in the past, mainly around technology. One of the passions of mine is solving problems that people have. They come to me with that problem. We figure out a way to fix it with technology.
So would you consider that just to be an entrepreneurial trait?
I think problem solving definitely is. I think that as an entrepreneur, you have a lot of fires and all of them typically are unique. So it's really good to be able to troubleshoot, figure out how to find a creative solution to problems.
Because essentially that is the mode you operate in, right? Because it's constantly every day there's a challenge to be overcome, and then you basically keep going until either you lose all your money or you make a whole bunch of money, right? That's
sure. Yeah.
I say that because of Andrew Yang, right? And that's kind of what he says. He's a serial entrepreneur and he's there to fix problems. So for me, for any of you that don't understand that, just go ahead and Google it. But for me, I was like, wow, that was a really weird, different way of explaining themselves and their mindset. And I was like, I really like that.
Sure.
And I've never thought of myself in that context. I just like solving problems. So, and you and I have discussed it a little bit of kind of like the difference between how you and I and my mentality really differed from yours. But anyway, I don't want to digress from that. What is it that you wanted to come on and talk about today?
Sure. Yeah. So last week in Vegas, we had one of the largest hacker conferences in the world. So we had Black Hat and DEF CON. And basically everybody comes from around the world to discuss different exploits, how we can secure things, and essentially make the world a better place through hacking. So that's either biohacking or that's network security. That could be...
I didn't know they had biohacking.
Yeah, biohacking is really cool. And they have a whole village that was really fun to look at, how we can make voting safe, because any voting machines that are out there today can be completely hacked.
Of course.
So yeah, it was a really, really great conference, and it really spurred in me a concept that I've been struggling with in our world right now. Our world is kind of a trusted society, and if we could shift to a zero trust or a trustless society, I think essentially it would solve a lot of problems that we're seeing now, and we're going to definitely see coming up in the future.
Okay. So with that, we did start off a little bit earlier, and you were kind of explaining that to me. So with that, let's go ahead and explain to everybody else that might be listening to this. So what do you mean by a trustless society?
Sure. Yeah. So in a trusted society, let's work from that first. Essentially, we all have a trust in something. So I'm not saying that all of a sudden we're not going to trust everybody and, it's going to be anarchy. Essentially, in a trustless society or a trust-free, zero trust, whatever term you want to use, you don't trust a governing body or an entity with everything. So for example, the best example I can give is the bank. So right now you go and deposit money in the bank. You're assuming that money is going to stay in there for you, that they're going to allow you to take that money out.
We feel that there's FDIC, right?
Technically, yes. But what can happen, how does the bank make money? So if I deposit $10,000 in the bank, they can actually hold on to 10% of it, and then the rest of it they can loan out.
Correct.
So how come they get to make money on my money, but I don't? How come they are the holder of the money? How come they won't allow me to walk in and take $10,000 directly out? I don't actually own that money. I am giving it to the bank to hold on to. And what happens if there's a bad actor there? So, for example, you have...
Well, that's what we had in 2008 with investment banking.
To a certain extent, but you have a way that there are some checks and balances with ledgers. So, for example, if I keep my checkbook up, I can see I deposited this much money, I've written these checks, right?
Right.
The bank is also keeping a ledger. Well, what if they disagree with me? The bank is always going to win in that case, right? Because they are the governing body. I am trusting that they are going to keep my money safe. They're going to say all these transactions are valid.
Well, the idea would be that the way that they audit you, you'd have to prove it with their means.
Right.
Correct.
So why do I have to prove that?
Yeah, correct.
I'm trusting them.
Now you're kind of talking more into like blockchain and
sure. Yeah. So I look at it with a trustless society or zero trust as there's some pillars in it. And a big one that most people can understand is money. Another one is communication, and the other one's information. Those are the buckets I kind of put them into. So we touched a little bit on banking, but let's look at it at its more core value of what is everything that's transacted today is using money. And money is a very generic term, right? So we can be using shells from thousands of years ago. We can use pieces of paper. So if I give you a $1 bill, how can you verify that it's authentic, that I haven't done a double spend, for example. So if I take a dollar bill and I make a Xerox of it, it has the same serial number on it. And now magically I have $2. I can give you one of those dollars. Is it the fake one or the real one? How can you verify that? You're trusting me. So why do we have a society that we have that kind of trust? How come I couldn't with math, cryptographically find out if that's a valid dollar bill? That would be a way that I am not trusting you anymore.
Well, I mean, I see what you're saying, and I see where you're kind of coming from, right? And granted, I understand. I just want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence for maybe somebody else that, like, what are they talking about? Sure. So the idea would be, we fundamentally, for the system that we currently have, we have to have trust, right? One of the things that come up for me, and I don't know who else has seen this, is that when all this stuff happened in 2008, Germany came knocking to the United States and said, we want to go check on our gold. And the Federal Reserve said, yes, we'll let you check it.
Sure.
Give us 1 minute. And it took them almost 2 weeks for them to go see their gold. Strange, right? If the gold's just sitting there in this thing. So that idea for me, when I started hearing about this on the news, I was like, man, that's really strange. How could it take so long to see something that just sits in a room?
It's a tangible object.
Correct, because it's gold, right? That's what they have their monetary system based on. So really, in my mind, I was like, man, that's a little strange. Why would somebody take so long? Now, to the point that I think you're trying to make, is the idea is that the reason why most of those gold, I don't know, you want to call them repositories, came to the U.S. was after World War II, right? They just felt like the U.S. would be the most stable economy and that we could hold it for them for whatever else
And at that time, we were on the gold standard.
Correct.
So
yeah. So the idea is that is fundamentally what it's based on, is that we have a trust that you are going to do right by everyone. And so that trust equates that we will go with you, or you can hold it for us, right?
Sure.
Now, why can't we have a society where instead of just saying, I need to have that fundamental trust in order for this to work, to say, let's just be accountable to each other. Let's make sure that whatever we could see is objective and we can see it the same way. And that's kind of what you're alluding to, that gives us...
Somewhat. So Ronald Reagan made a quote famous that was an old Russian proverb. And basically it was, trust but verify. Right. So when he was dealing with the Soviet Union during the end of the Cold War, that was kind of the mentality. And I actually say, let's flip that and say, trust nothing, verify everything. So essentially money is bits right now. It's numbers on a ledger. You're saying, yes, tangibly, there's gold in a vault somewhere in Fort Knox that you could count.
Right.
And I'm saying you could have money be whatever you want. So if that's the case, how come you need a bank anymore? How come you couldn't act as your own bank? If it is strictly just digitally a ledger, I have $1,000 in my bank account. How come I have to have a physical building that is housing those numbers in it?
Well, I think it's just generational, honestly, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it's a concept that we have for not just our generation or the United States. It's for many, many generations, as long as humans have been around. So as long as trade has been around, we have had to have some kind of trust. When we had a small tribes, we had everybody kind of pitching in, hunters, gatherers, and everybody was kind of working together as a community. But as those grew, we had to trust other tribes when we started to do trade. And that's when commerce came in. So that's when you start getting that trust. I trust that this object, this ledger I'm keeping, is going to be valid. Well, what if we flip the script on that and said, well, what if we put the onus on us? What if we use
because
technology?
we have mechanisms to have it be universal now? Because I'm going back to the hunter-trader thing. I mean, a lot of people robbed and pillaged for that reason, right? There was no trust. They understood that you had something. They were going to go take it. Easy way. But hopefully or luckily, our society has come a little bit further than that. And now what you're saying is, why can't we go a little bit further past that and say, truly, what is the need of money? What is money? And then how is the future going to then transact it?
Sure. But I'm going even one step further, because with trust, money is just one little pillar of it. Communication is another, and information is another, where you can use technology to leverage all these and get economies of scale to make lives easier. So we talked about money, we talked about banks, but another good one is credit cards, right?
Yeah.
So everybody that's ever had a credit card number stolen, skimmed, a chip cloned, now you're thinking, well, how did this happen? How is it so easy? If I have your credit card number, I can start spending. How come in this trusted society, that makes it so easy. In a trustless society, essentially, I'm saying I send you $50. Why are you reaching into my account to take $50 out? In a trustless society, I'm pushing things out, not pulling from my account.
Right.
So that's not a concept anybody ever comes up with in the concept of money and the concept of banking or credit cards. But that's how we should be doing all transactions. And yes, things like cryptocurrency make that a lot easier because it's a one-way transaction and you can force it, verify, authenticate it, and then make sure that the money goes there. You can also see where it is in transit. Another good example is wire transfers. If I'm in the EU and I transfer some money, that may take a considerable amount of time, and I don't know if it actually happens until it gets into my bank account. Why can't I see where the transaction is? It's in flight. It's in escrow. It's getting ready to go into my account.
Well,
Cryptocurrency fixes that.
I mean, one of the things that comes up for me, and just for people to understand, I all these conversations have to happen authentically and through you and I. So we didn't pre-talk about this, and that's where the magic, I think, is going to happen. So with that, what's coming up to my mind is that is essentially where people make their money by saying fees. We have this because. In an example of this that just happened to me recently is I had to cancel a vacation, and so my money went into some, hey, you have this credit. So when I went to go use the credit, they're like, I basically lost half of my credit. I said, why? What service did you render? Oh, well, it's our fee. I was like, no, I get that. But what service did you render for that fee?
Sure.
Oh, it's this thing that you clicked on that had all that listed it to you and clearly described. Said, look, I never read your thing. There was a checkbox because it was through a third party. So I said, if you're going to hold me to that, right? So anyway, long story short, I kind of talked to the person, and eventually they're like, look, this one time we're going to waive it, but you're still going to have to pay one of our fees, which ended up being $50. And I'm like, look, I don't get that. And I hope that this is a good example to say, like, why should I have to break with anything when it was my money? I paid for it. You never rendered the service. I get that you want to have this security blanket of, hey, but what happens to us if we don't have it from a business model? But truly what we're talking about is it should be accountable to say nothing was rendered. I get it back.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the easy answer for somebody that has run a few businesses and sees how the corporate giant works is this is the way we've always done it. So if Delta doesn't
business as usual,
if Delta doesn't give you the refund and they can charge you a fee, they do that. You can look at another airline, for example, like Southwest. They don't do that. So you can say, how come they can do it, but this other company doesn't do it? They make money at it. So it's as simple as that. So you're right. I like the idea that there's no transaction that is being performed. Let's say if you were on the phone with somebody for an hour, absolutely, you could see a justified reason for that fee. But all of this is software in the back end.
Yep.
And essentially, that's what I'm talking about with these transactions. There should be no reason for those transaction fees to be so exorbitant. So a good example of that is like American Express, Visa, MasterCard. For each swipe of the card, they take a percentage of the purchase. Well, it's the same amount of energy to transfer that data across. The transaction costs the same. The servers, all the infrastructure is exactly the same if I swipe for 99 cents or if I swipe for $100,000. So why on a $100,000 transaction would I be paying thousands of dollars in fees?
Because that's their business model, right?
Because they can charge for that. But this is all software now, right? So you could literally take that concept and say, I understand that's how you've been doing it for 100 years. However, there is a new way to do it that we can do where it's a push-based technology, that the transactions are very small because we don't have to have giant buildings anymore. We don't have to have incentives with Darth Vader on your credit card so that, you're going to get charged $100 more for that feature, things like that. All those things are unnecessary and they can make more money on it.
So, I mean, what comes up for me is recently how Wells Fargo got in trouble for basically scamming their own clients and forcing employees to these really how do I want to put this? Not unbalanced, but truly not thought out business practices. It was about the number. It wasn't about how do we get there. It wasn't about the service that we provide. It was you need to get more people to consume more. Right?
Sure, it was an unethical practice they were doing, and it wasn't out for the consumer's best interest.
So fundamentally, I think that's essentially what the practice is. Think of like payday loans, right? A lot of people that maybe are a little strapped for cash is like, hey, I want to do well, but the idea is that the amount of interest that you pay to take that is already gonna, if you're already short, you're gonna be even shorter. So I think really it comes down to just financial education of how the system is created, where people kind of start slowly escaping it.
Sure.
But to the point that I believe that you're making is, but why do we still need to do business that way? If our world is ever changing and evolving, why can't we start evolving, or at least trying to keep up with that change? Because I believe from a social structure that has to change the way that we do. Really, what comes to mind is how social structures get put together again, at least in this society, right? There's always some sort of factor to that, but that's kind of what's coming to my mind. Is that kind of what you're alluding to? Is it just more about the technology?
I think technology is an enabler, right? So it helps you get to whatever end goal that you want. So obviously we're looking at it from a very westernized world when we're talking about banking and money. 8% of the world is unbankable.
Yeah, but I just had the example, I think it was before the camera was on, about Africa, right? And
Africa's
there's
a great
so
example.
much corruption in Africa because it's the take, right? Everybody just slices through the top. But how could you slice through the top if everything's digital? Like, yeah, I'll send you the money, but it's going to be a ledger.
How could you prevent that? Would simply be you wouldn't have banks in Africa like you don't have now. So over 90% of the population is unbankable in Africa. They can't go to a bank and get money. So what are they supposed to do? They hold their cash onto them, which is a physical note in their hand, put it under their mattress, wherever they may have it. What if they could have that in a digital format that now they can send money over their phone? If they can send an SMS message, they would be able to send that transaction. They don't need the bank anymore. They cut out that corruption. Technology enables that. So going back to your initial question of is it the technology that enables it, or is it people's mindset that changes? I think if you empower people with the technology, they make a decision that is what could be in their best interest. So there's two examples that always come to mind. One is Blockbuster. Everybody knows the story.
Great company.
Of the Goliath that decided, hey, that was a silly idea for them to send DVDs in the mail. People are going to want to come to the store and shop. So they thought it was a novel concept. Netflix.
I think that's been the same for a lot of different retail places, right? They
not
think
not just retail, right? So it's, if you think about it, like banking is a good example of that. You have an industry, right? So it's not just retail, but another great industry like that would be Uber or Lyft, completely upending the taxi industry, right? So say what you will about Uber's practices, whatnot, but they essentially saw a problem with an industry. The industry, rather than making their services better and cheaper, they spent millions upon millions of dollars to fight it, creating laws to make this not happen, right? So if they had a good service, if they were able to take care of their customers, this would have never happened. Same thing with Blockbuster. If you're catering to your needs, possibly you weren't able to anticipate what your customers wanted, but you could have seen the writing on the wall when your competitors came in, but they couldn't because they were too large to be nimble and shift to a different mindset.
So, I mean, right now, I'm keeping up as best as I can, because obviously there's a lot of different items that are being discussed right now. But for most people, maybe possibly listening in, really, we keep jumping a lot, right?
Sure.
So there's a lot of concepts that we're covering. But going back to the original one, which was for this money, right? Well, not money, but basically the blockchain, right? The capability to have everything be transparent. I'm assuming that's what you kind of were bringing
in some way. So we talked a little bit about that, and it's easy to understand if people understand the concept of blockchain, but let's shift it a little bit to where we're not talking about money and another form of a trustless society that would be very beneficial.
Well, I thought blockchain was what it is because it's not just money. It's also how to do contract transactions.
Sure.
It was any way to transfer some type of ownership where it was essentially arm's length.
Yeah,
and I mean, that's why banks are really looking at it.
Absolutely. So I kind of looked at three pillars. I had money as one, I've got communication as one, and information as another. What you're kind of talking about is information. So imagine I go and buy a house. So currently, as the system states in the United States, I'm going to have to pay closing cost. I'm going to have to pay an escrow fee, which could be a few $100s for someone to hold my money.
But that's the take.
Well, okay. So let's see how we can look at it differently in a trustless society, right? So escrow is pretty easy. Escrow is basically saying, I don't trust you to not take off with this money. Here's $500, put it into an account nobody can touch until the transaction is finished.
Right.
Essentially, that is like a trustless mindset.
Correct.
However, it's controlled by one company. One company is holding that money and they charge $500 for that transaction. Blockchain can fix that. So with a smart contract, you could easily have that transaction could cost cents rather than $500. It may cost a transaction fee of 10 cents, right? So, and you can also speed up that.
So what you're trying to say is you want to put more people out of jobs.
Absolutely. Yep. I want to, all right. So the analogy I always give is if you're doing it in a less efficient way that isn't bringing joy to people's lives, why do people have that job? I could pay someone to cut my grass with a pair of scissors. Is that the smartest thing to do? They could work more per hour and I'd be paying them more if they use scissors, or we can use a lawnmower. So if you have technology that enables the ability for people to get a job done faster, you get economies of scale, people could potentially now have careers or things that they can do that they actually like to do. You can't tell me somebody that is getting paid to do a title search loves their job.
So what comes up for me when you say that, right, is because this is a hot button subject with this whole Andrew Yang thing in UBI, right? The freedom dividend that he keeps talking about.
Sure.
So unfairly, both you and I are in the IT field, so we kind of understand. How, we're constantly nested in it. We understand what's coming up. We see where the trend is going, and we see that pretty much every company out there is just dying for efficiency gains, right? Because the idea would be less staff, more money for everybody else that's there, and then the idea would be, well, it just kind of keeps rolling to the top, right? As long as you're at the top and things get more efficient, well, more and more rolls up, right? Think of Amazon. That's why they went through robotics. Anyway, so the reason I'm saying that is because I believe that there are people that don't understand this, that they see it as, but you're coming after my job, not, oh, but things get better.
Sure.
Even for me, right? So one example that kind of, I don't want to bring more into it. You already made the example of like Lyft and Uber, right?
Sure.
How great is that before you had to stop by a cab, you got to stand in really long lines. I just actually took my first cab just the other day, so that was a little strange. But the experience of I can order a service when I need it, so I don't have to be at the whim of the service being available.
Sure.
I consume it. So, and the idea of that would be, hey, I go on my app, I order a Lyft. I know that I've ordered that service. The service is going to come for me now. This is great. I know I know how much I'm going to pay before I take it. It's very, I don't know. I don't know if you would call that a trustless, but the idea is everybody knows what they're paying, right?
Sure.
So with the cab, though, what was always the gripe? Well, I don't know if he's taking me the right way or her, right?
I don't know if they're going to show up.
Yeah.
So in Vegas, a big issue. I lived out in the suburbs, and they just simply wouldn't come out.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of issues with the service. Now, could the taxi company, just like Blockbuster could have, said, hey, our customers are complaining about this thing, let's change it? They could have. And then Uber would have never come up if they wouldn't be scamming people, if they would always take credit cards. If they were listening to their customer, it wouldn't be an issue if they made the experience better. However, I think there's some side benefits that we get rather than just simply it being a better experience for me. When Uber and Lyft came about, all of a sudden drunk driving also started to drop because you had more consistency with people getting picked up and going home, and they didn't have to wait a half an hour for a cab to pick them up.
Right.
So I think you'll see a lot of other things, possibly negative, possibly positive, with things when you're dealing with technology that they're able to leverage it. So a good example is Netflix, right? You don't have to go to the store. You can sit there in your underwear, figure out what movie you want to watch, and you just do it from your house.
Well, I don't do that. But
I mean, technically I might, but so it allows you some conveniences. And yes, guess what? The person that's working that counter, unfortunately, they wouldn't have a job because there wouldn't be a store anymore. You will get shakeout from many, many industries, everything from radial technician, so someone that scans x-rays, right? Checks for the bone, checks for cancer cells developing. So we can say that is a very, very highly paid position. And unfortunately, they could get reduced in the number of them or completely cut out if we automate that with artificial intelligence. So what's the benefit of that though? Computers and AI is able to identify cancer cells with a greater accuracy than human eyes can.
Right.
There's no issue of a tech being tired, so they missed something. So you do get all those benefits along with it.
And they also have a much larger sample set to compare against.
Huge. And with that, guess what? Now you can start spotting trends.
Yeah.
So you can have these giant leaps forward that you wouldn't be able to have if you were just having a single person doing that. Automated driving is another example of that. Yes, right now we have Uber, but what happens when Uber starts driving itself? Same thing with truck drivers. Truck drivers are highly paid people, not super skilled, which is amazing for a large majority of the people that maybe might not have a job doing anything else. Maybe they've been driving trucks for their entire life, don't have a high education level, and they're getting paid really well. Well, when the trucks are able to drive 24 hours because they're able to charge on the road or on the fly, they don't have to stop after driving for 12 hours.
Yeah, but that's not coming for another 50 years, right?
Sure.
Well, I don't know. The unfair part of this conversation is both you and I are pretty balls deep in this.
Right.
So, but for most people that are watching this, if you don't know this or you're not in the tech field or you don't probably keep up, that's why I really follow Andrew Yang a lot, because this is something that one of the first candidates I've ever heard actually speak about these things.
Sure.
So I think it's great that you're kind of speaking about this, because you're not coming from that sense. You're coming from your technology background, and now you're essentially going more into kind of speaking about like, how is our society going to accept what's coming? Not, are they willing to go down that path? There is no wanting. It's going to happen.
Sure.
So, my own personal experience with change is really, you don't change your life based on things that happen to you by saying, I will prevent these and I will just do something else. You have to accept and then figure out, okay, if I have to accept what's happening, how do I then accept that so that I can move forward with a new direction?
Sure.
And I don't think our society does that very well.
I think it's a slow boil process, right? So it's the frog in the pot. You put the frog in the pot of water, put it on the stove, the frog stays in there. You turn on the stove, it will stay in there and boil and die. However, if it's a rapid boil, you put the frog in there, he hops out immediately, right? So I think as a society, we're very, very inclined to get in that pot while it's still cold water, and then we kind of figure it out until the change actually happens, right? So if we didn't, then Netflix could have never come along. We would have still been going to Blockbuster. But what happened was we saw our friends with this change, saw that their lives were easier. They were starting to brag about it. And then all those little changes. First, it was a DVD in the mail. Because they saw on the horizon, hey, we know streaming will happen. We can't do it right now because the bandwidth wasn't good enough in the United States at the time. It was too expensive, but they saw on the horizon where they wanted to go. So I think that if we're able to slow people into it, especially if there is some catastrophic event or if there's something horrible that happens to them, anybody that's had their credit card skimmed from a gas station will say, if you can give me a product that will prevent this thing from happening to me, I will adopt it. So it's those little baby steps of a trustless society that I think will make people better. So another example that we hadn't talked about was communication, which is a huge one. So for me, that's one of the pivotal ones, because I think right now people take for granted. They give information away a lot. They're like, well, I don't have anything to hide. I don't care. So who cares if my emails aren't encrypted? I'm not sending anything that I don't want anybody to just read. So that's a double-edged sword when you're dealing with something like security. If it's not encrypted, if I'm not able to verify that this is actually Steven that is sending me this email and that it's not spoofed. So it'd be very easy for me to spoof an email, essentially make it look like it came from you. It's got information in it, and then you're responding to it. So everybody's gotten the spams and the phishing attempts like that. That's very easy to do. Well, a simple way to fix that would be to say, can we verify, let's say a caller ID that is actually encrypted that verifies this is Steven. Immediately, all of that goes away.
Usually with encryption is that it's the encryption token that does that, right?
So the problem is it gets a little bit confusing. So for example, if you use Gmail, they're like, hey, everything's encrypted. Not really. So if I log into the Gmail website and I type up an email and I send it to you, yes, that happens over an encryption channel, but it's sitting on a server unencrypted. So if I work at Google, I can read your email. That's how you get the ads on the side.
Well, now you're kind of going down the rabbit hole for most people that don't understand.
Sure.
That don't work in the IT field or understand like, encryption at rest and all this other stuff. But I mean, if we can make it pull it back out a little bit more, broad scale, really what you're saying is all this information exists. So are you trying to make a case for the information should be, made commoditized so that people actually say that's my, and you should not have access to it?
Not really. So basically what it boils down to is what I was talking about before is not trusting anybody. So I'm not trusting anything at all. I'm verifying everything. So when I get an email in, I have some system that verifies that says, this is actually Stephen that has sent me this email. Another great example would be anything on your cell phone. If I send you an SMS message, guess what? I can make it look like it's Stephen. Here's a better example. I could say, I could send someone a SMS message that says, hi, this is your spouse. It comes from their phone number. Hey, we're getting ready to get a message from the bank. They're going to call you and verify a charge. I just tried to go to the gas station. They thought it was a fraudulent charge. I could type all that up in an SMS message, make it look like it came from your spouse's SMS text, and then all of a sudden they would be, okay, I'll hit yes when I get that call or text message. All of that is unencrypted. It's not verified. You're automatically trusting the world. Oh, this is who they say they are. So what I'm saying is if we have a way that we can authenticate everything that happens, every transaction, even if it's a video that's played, let's say there's a video of the president speaking. How can I verify that's actually the president speaking? So with technology now, you have things called deep fakes, right?
Right.
So I can use with artificial intelligence, I can make the president say whatever I want.
And for people that don't know, deepfake basically is a software that people use so that it could actually digitally create your face. Joe Rogan does this a lot. And it makes it appear online as you actually said it. And they are pretty fucking real.
Absolutely.
Pretty scary.
So it's much easier to do it with vocals, with audio, and where it's.
You also need a large data set of the person's face.
You do, but that's shrinking. So right now, as AI improves and the ability for that improves, you will see that you'll be able to do deep fakes of your friends. Because guess what? You've got videos on Facebook. You've got things that you've shared that is content of you that I could pull together and create a deep fake. So let's go back to that scenario. So let's say I create a phone call to you where I'm spoofing the number. It looks like it comes from your spouse. I could imitate your spouse's voice at this point. So how can I verify that that is who they say they are? So it goes back to my concept of if it's a trustless society, imagine there's some kind of authentication token to say, I know that for a fact that this is an authentic video from the president. Everything else I don't trust. I know this is an authentic phone call that came from this device. And let's say with cryptography or however you do it, you're verifying this is who they really say they are. That's what I'm talking about in a trustless society. Right now, it is less likely that you're going to get impersonated, but it's easy to do that with social engineering in the future where you will be able to do those things.
To me, this is kind of really what comes up for me when you talk about this is let's just make it really simple for people to understand. Condoms exist, right? Those are a real thing.
Sure.
Do people still not use them? Sure. So the idea would be that, right? Is that even though there's a method of convenience to help a person, there is still this idea of, well, even though there's a benefit in it for me, I still want something else for some other reason. So when I say that is because to do encryption or to stay on top of it, it takes a lot of effort, at least right now, right? Because as they commoditize things and as they make them, people, I mean, look at, what was it? Mega Upload, right? They were doing encryption and they were selling encryption service. And then, the US government came after them hard.
Sure.
There was another, God damn it, I apologize, guys. I don't have any of the references, but there was another company that offered encrypted email services where they dumped the logs, everything. It was 100%. And then the government came and said, you need to give us a backdoor. You need to shut it down. They're like, great, we'll shut it down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are just a few examples. Please Google it. I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of them. I'm sure you know about them too. But really what we're talking about is, so there's actually essentially a underground fight to keep these encryption methods to keep growing, for them to be more and more consumable at essentially where it's easier for me to encrypt everything. Because all I ever hear really in, we'll call it a major media is, but why do you need to encrypt? Right? Why do you need
You don't
Tor?
have anything to hide. Why are you doing it?
Well, I mean, and that's the thing is, I don't think anybody else has anything to hide, but
that's not a good
if
excuse.
I took a picture of you taking a shit, that's probably one of the pictures you're like, I don't know if that's really the one I want out there, right? Maybe take my Christmas one that I took with the wife.
Right.
So most people might have something like that out there. Not an idea of it's bad. It's where's the context? And when you can't provide context, it's whatever you make it or somebody else makes of it, right?
I think for some of the reasons I detailed out, that would explain to somebody why in the future you want the society to shift to this, right? So it's like you have to stay one or two steps in front of the hackers or people that are going to do malice, right? And more importantly, if you can build up the system so that you can't have a bad actor that causes harm. So essentially somebody on the inside that is looking at your emails or looking at your private photos because they're not on an encrypted server. I'm saying if you don't trust anyone, automatically you're protected. So you're right. You brought the condom analogy up, which I love. So why don't people use condoms? They're difficult, doesn't feel as good, whatever reason.
Right, whatever the reason is.
So if you make the technology where it's invisible, people don't care if when they go on Amazon right now that it's protected with a certificate, because you make that process seamless.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting is essentially you're creating the infrastructure underneath to allow that trustless society so that it's easy for a grandmother to use, so that she knows she doesn't even care or need to know that message is encrypted, but she knows that this is the call from her grandson, right?
So really when you're saying all this, what is the gap that you perceive for that happening? Because obviously it's a future state, something that we would like, but that's not necessarily where we are today. And myself, I'm at home. I don't use a VPN. This is normally stuff that I would do for work or a client that I work for, because they have that security need, right?
Right.
But none of us say, oh, I'm going to go get a VPN because that's what I want to always have, so that all my traffic, at least in all my browsing history while it's in traffic, it's at least encrypted back to that server. Where it goes from there, oh well.
Sure. I think you'll have a seismic shift when people are tired of being the product.
Do you believe it's education?
I think some of it is. So I think some of it now that's been shaking out with Brexit, with the elections, a lot of the data that came out from Cambridge Analytica.
Oh, that was awesome.
Yeah, right. People are tired of being the product, right? And essentially what it boils down to is if you're not paying for the service, you are the product.
But you see, I don't know if I agree with that, Matt. I apologize. Not that I don't agree with what you said. Of course, you're right. What I'm saying is I don't necessarily agree that. I think it's generational, man. I mean, our life expectancy has gone up. People are living much longer than they once did.
Sure.
And we now have people that carry this old way of thinking further into maybe in the past was like it just kind of died off faster, right? I don't mean to be morbid about that. It's the truth. So that's a conversation I've had with a couple other friends, which is essentially, are we in a position where basically our old generation doesn't want to move? I mean, I find myself the same way, man. Honestly, I'm that old guy now. I found out because I heard all these stupid ways that people refer to each other now. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Sure.
They're like, oh, you don't know? I'm like, no, I don't fucking know. I don't keep up with this. And I'm like, oh, I'm the old guy. I'm not keeping up with whatever the young people are talking about or how they prefer, right? Like pronouns. Don't come up to me with that. I don't know what your pronoun is. Just, how about you tell me and I'll just use it, right?
Yeah.
But I see that's the mentality where my mind is no longer in that because I don't have a direct reference to it in my daily life. So I'm the old guy. I'm falling out of touch. Certain things that I'm actually keeping involved with, which technology things, because I have a personal interest in it. But now if we look at it as society, everybody has their own personal interest in different things. So how do we say together, how do we all grow to understand what's about to come?
Sure.
Because I think that's a big deal that your convention makes it crystal clear, right? You're always forward thinking there and people are always showing off like what they could do. And then I don't even know how much time to give it, but eventually it's getting closer and closer that people start seeing it. It's not that far ahead because it just catches up, right?
Sure.
So really as a society, what do we need to do as a society to truly understand what the impact of it is and how we can then accept our change so that we can align to it better, right? Like you said, like commoditizing the encryption, which is, oh, hey, we have this product. It automatically encrypts for you. Look at how easy it is. It scans your iris or something, and it just is like, yes, we verified it's you, so we'll go ahead and handle everything else in the back end. What do you think that is going to be for us?
To answer your question, I think definitely younger generations have that plasticity that allows them to adapt faster. I think that they tend to be more on the cutting edge. They push the technology. Why Twitter became so popular, and then Facebook, and then it shows the cycles.
What about MySpace?
Right. Hey, I'm still a friend with Tom. So yes, you definitely have and it's the cycles are becoming faster and faster. So you see an adoption rate by people that aren't dug in, right? That's the way we've always done it. So we're going to continue to do it that way. So you will see a driving force from the younger generation. So if we could have them be the ones that say, hey, you know what? My information isn't important. Hey, I don't want to have ads targeted to me. I'm willing to pay a little bit more money. And then that's not an issue. That's not the revenue model for that service that I'm using. So if they have that kind of shift in mentality, I think that it will cascade down to the other generations. I mean, racism's a good example of that, right? So it's like we're just waiting for people to die off so that racism slowly starts to fade out. And you're right. People of an older generation dig in. They say, well, this is the word I've always used. Right. Well, that's not okay to use anymore.
But do you think that's being implanted now in the future generation? I mean, we have a personal experience with this. I apologize, don't want to say that. Where we live, there was somebody that was just arrested because they were walking around a neighborhood with an AR-15.
Sure.
And the FBI got involved and saw that they were making claims about possibly wanting to shoot up an LGBT club. And I mean, like, to me, that's just fucking crazy. But what was he, 23?
Sure.
So does that make sense? Like, so does you think that's going to get passed on, and we're like, are we just in this perpetual cycle of just bullshit carrying on? Like, it's not dying fast enough?
I think it depends what solution you're trying to come to the specific issue. So I think things of race, understanding, I think those can change quickly within a generation. I think a shift of going from a trusted society to a trustless society can shift pretty quick. And I don't think, for me, I want people to think about the concept of it and not giving your information away freely. That's not, it's okay to spend a little bit of money and pay for a service rather than just saying, oh, well, that should always be free. And then now my data is getting sold because of that.
But don't we just keep dancing around the fact that we all love convenience? Think about Amazon and how if we can get, any product, better quality but cheaper, we're all about it.
Sure.
So where's the personal responsibility from the consumer to say, well, we have to take ownership of what we're doing, as you're saying, we understand that how information works. We understand how, all these giant companies, especially like one of the very many companies that are doing large data sets and data scientists are doing all their great stuff of saying, we have so much data now that we can actually really crunch the numbers and see what's going to happen possibly, right?
Yeah, predictive analysis.
Right.
For sure. Amazon's a great example, right? So Amazon compared to Facebook, let's compare the two companies. Amazon has a revenue model. They have products that they sell. They make amount of money on each transaction. That's how they make money. It's pretty easy. They've been making money for a long time. Do you think they sell their data set to a competitor? Are they going to turn around and say, Walmart, here's some information about this customer of the things they want to buy and their shopping patterns? No, that's gold to them. They're going to keep that and have a better experience for you. Yes, you may get targeted ads. Guess what? That's probably something that you want to buy. That's an example of a company. You can have whatever issues you have with Amazon and how they treat their workers. However, they've got their eye on the ball of they make money this way. They want to treat their customers as best as they can. That's that model. Now look at Facebook. Facebook is free. So now you are not a customer anymore. You're the product. So your browsing history, your likes, your friends, that's data that they can sell. They don't make any money on you other than having an ad. Ads are really, really cheap. So what they do is they take massive amounts of data and then sell it off to people. So either you're paying for a service or you yourself are going to be the product. So I think if you have that shift in mindset and not trusting people, you only give out the information you want to, it can create a seismic shift in the services that are offered.
Let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. What you're trying to say is that Facebook should get a Patreon page. And then
I would imagine if you went to Mark Zuckerberg and say, I know, Mark, that you're only making a fraction of cents off each user by selling their data, and those customers, new customers, would be willing to pay 50 cents a month, they would actually start making a profit, and they would probably double or triple what they're expecting. The problem is right now, data is so cheap because you have to have so much of it. If you have someone that would be willing to say, hey, I'm going to opt out of that. I don't want my data to be stored. Or more importantly, I'm only going to give you the data that I have available or want to hand out to you. I think that you would have a better experience for the end user. You would have a service that you actually would use. You want to use this thing, so it would be tailored to you, and you wouldn't be the product anymore.
But you see, I think that you say that only because you understand the back end.
Do you think people like to be have ads pop on their face?
I mean, I don't think anybody likes it, but the idea is.
So if I want to see. But now they can build a profile of you and give you targeted ads. They can say, all right, well, we know this person lives in a swing state because we can find that from geolocation. We can figure out that he watches these specific paranoid videos.
Right.
So we're going to tailor around him because he lives in Ohio. He's a paranoid person. We're going to have targeted ads to him that could potentially swing an election. So that is a bigger issue that I see with it right now is the data that they collect on it is able to pull a lot of information, and it's very valuable for them rather than just simply paying for that and saying, do not collect my data and don't play ads anymore.
No, I totally get it, right? And I'd probably have to play the devil's advocate a little bit more is, but the normal person that doesn't work in IT don't understand large data sets. They don't understand what that means, right? They don't understand that. And I just recently learned this. I was watching some video about like statistics and probabilities.
Sure.
And the way that those work better is by the law of large numbers, meaning the larger the data set, the more accurate it is. Yeah. So in my mind, what came to me was exactly that, which was, holy shit, imagine the amount of data that's being compiled and how all these people on the back end, especially mathematicians that break it down mathematically, can now give them a much more concise analysis about what the possibility or the probability is going to be of something, of an outcome. So if you keep doing that and then you start doing it with, psychology, and you start reinforcing it with essentially what we do. And, this all kind of comes back to that. I don't know I think you watch it too, right? The Cambridge Analytica thing on Netflix.
Yeah, great.
It kind of keeps coming to that, which is you are a pawn if you don't choose to wake up and see how people use certain things to influence you.
Sure.
And to me, the bigger question, or what comes up for me, is you should never be a pawn because you always question everything. So I don't know if that's maybe something I do just naturally. I don't know if you do that naturally. But really what it is I don't think everybody does it naturally. I don't think people...
I agree.
Because we live in probably that society, right? That trust society.
Yeah.
I
don't
personally
question things,
right.
for sure. Yeah, you're going to just assume that this is the truth, and I think that's going to change. The more you come out and you see celebrities or people that have passed away, you're going to see a video of them saying things where it's like, well, that person never said anything. So more deep fakes come out, people will start questioning everything. So I think that's a good philosophy to have. I like that kind of quest for knowledge, and that I don't really trust everything. I'm going to verify. That is a much more analytical way to look at the world rather than just fumbling through it. The skeptic's mind is the best way to look at the world, right? So it's, if you can say, I don't know if this is true, I'm going to dig into that fact, you're going to be a better society. You'll always have the people that don't have that skeptic's eye, which is normal. But I think that if you enable the technology to just make it safer for them, you allow encryption to happen, you make it automatic, you build these kind of safety measures in place, I think that you're going to have a better society because of it.
So does that kind of cohesively do the whole thought? Because I know that you also had the communication part of that also.
Sure, yeah. Another big part of the communication. So you help out identify the person as who they are. Just like you're going to know that, hey, Dominic actually sent me this email. It's actually him. Nobody else has read this email, so it flew across the internet magically. Now it's in your inbox and only you can read it. So that's one piece of that trustless society. With the deep fakes, you can trust that this video of the president speaking is actually him. So imagine it has like some kind of certificate or key on it to verify, yes, this was published by the president. Or let's say it's a video chat with you, you can verify that it actually is them. So those are two really, really big holes that we have in our communication that we just simply trust. If we have a text message from a spouse or a loved one, we assume that it's them. That is one of the easiest things to hack. So that's a simple thing that we could fix with technology that would be completely invisible to the end user. So using something like Signal, the messaging app, it encrypts everything on your phone. It encrypts it in transit. It verifies to make sure it is the person that was sending it. And that's something that my grandmother could use. She wouldn't even know the difference from a regular SMS messaging system. So if you make the tools extremely easy to use and able to enable them to be trustless, I think that you'll have a society start shifting to that because you have the convenience. Another good example I always like to point out, because my last company was in the medical field, HIPAA laws are kind of a joke, right? Every time you go to a doctor's office, they hand you a piece of paper and say, put your name, date of birth, all this information. Now, why they don't have an iPad or some kind of tablet just blows my mind to this day. But what if we looked at it even better is to say, here's my token I give you. And attached to that token says the person that's requesting it, so the doctor's office's name, the date, so the time they actually requested the information, and this is only the information I'm going to share with you. Imagine that's your digital identity. And then you can go online. It's only available for you to edit, and you could update your address at any time. Now the doctor doesn't have to ask you at the yearly physical to say, well, has your address changed? Anything else changed? Because your digital identity is updated, right? So that's a simple way that, again, you are not trusting them anymore. You're giving them this information. It's only encrypted by you. You could use that same kind of system for voting. So now you could say, here is my vote for the election, and you can verify that your vote counted.
Like, what keeps coming up for me is none of this makes... It's not like none of this is complex or hard to understand, especially for anybody that actually looks it up for just a little bit, Googles a couple videos and see what they get. Yeah, Bing some videos. Is slowly they'll start saying like, oh yeah, I mean, this makes a lot of sense what you're saying, right? What really comes up for me is like gerrymandering, right? Is why do we need these voting things? It almost seems like the fuckery that happens on the back end is what's causing this to be, kind of the kink in the tube of change. Is it says, yeah, we'll only allow this much through, so everything else has to be throttled back. And I mean, I love what's going on in Iceland, right? They're really the ones really pushing right now to kind of make information free, make it so that there is value to it and that it is yours. I mean, they're doing a lot of good stuff over there, but I mean, it's a tiny little country in the middle. So it's happening, but how are we going to make it mainstream? I guess that's kind of what comes up for me.
So Iceland's a good example. Estonia is another good example. I think those act as a good proof of concept, right? So you don't want to do it at a massive scale. You don't want to change the tires while you're driving the car, right? So if you can do it on a smaller scale, adapt, see what the problems are, work out the kinks, and then you can roll it out in a larger society. I don't see that being a problem. Actually, I see that as a benefit, doing it in a smaller scale. Make sure your proof of concept works, and then you can roll it out. So you're talking about gerrymandering before, and you're talking about the government fighting for encryption. Why do people at home need encryption? Why are people at home using Tor? That's for terrorists. That's for this. That's for this. You have to look at, if someone is stopping progress, why are they doing that? Do they have an ulterior motive?
But I don't think people see it as, some people don't see it as progress. Some people think about a conservative mindset.
Sure, okay.
Is like, hey, things work now, man. What are you doing?
All right.
It ain't broke.
Sure. A good example of that in the city we live in, Las Vegas, the taxi company spent millions of dollars to kick out rideshare programs, right? To kick out Uber and Lyft.
And they also put a moratorium on new licenses, meaning there couldn't be competition.
So why would they do that?
Because it helps the people that are there.
It empowers the people that are paying the government to put the laws in place, right? So they're impeding progress, right? So it goes back to that what I said before. If the taxi companies were there when you called them, if they had an app, if they didn't stink, if they took credit cards all the time, you wouldn't have competition. The problem is you get these ingrained industries. Automotive industry is a great example. Energy industry, telecoms, where they spend a lot of money to keep things from changing or progressing. So I think that, yes, you're right, that people may look at it from, well, why do we need that thing? Everything is fine the way it is. I would agree with you, but if you're able to show them, for example, in Iceland, Estonia, these other places, well, yeah, there's a much better way to do things. Why don't we do it that way? I think that it kind of shines a lens on, well, maybe we should do that in the U.S. So
I agree. I'm just trying to do the best I can to play devil's advocate
Of
for maybe
course.
somebody out there yelling at their computer screen right now saying like, this fucking guy doesn't know.
Sure.
What is it that, I guess this is the mentality that I don't understand. What are we losing by trying something new?
Sure. So I would say you start with the low-hanging fruit. You start with the broken systems. Taxis, broken system. Blockbuster, broken system. There's a much better way to do it. The voting system that we have across these states.
But was it
is
really
a great
broken? I mean,
example.
it worked. What happened is efficiency took it out, right? Because now the convenience of going, because remember,
Sure.
there was the DVD mailer, and then there was those boxes that you could go to and centralize them around grocery stores.
The boxes
The
came
red
well
box.
after. Yeah, boxes came after Blockbuster went out of business.
Did they?
Yep.
No, yeah.
Because it was like a full circle. All right, it was a broken, let's say that you live in a rural town that doesn't have a video store in it. That's a broken system. Banking, you have, again, keep in mind, 80% of the globe is non-bankable. They can't give bank account. That's a broken system. So if you're able to say, this is a way that we can redo things, and these are all the benefits that you're going to get, and guess what? It doesn't really have any cons on the list. You're going to slowly start seeing those shifts. Nobody right now says how we do voting works. We can get an argument about electoral college versus any other systems.
You're just talking
that are
about
on-
like casting the vote.
count my vote
Yeah.
and let me verify my vote counted. There's no way to do that. Work on the
What are you
broken
talking about?
system.
There's a paper that comes out.
In our city, in our county, absolutely.
No, I get it, but it's still a manual process is what I'm getting at. Is a manual process to reconcile.
And fair enough. And that is when you go into the auditing and you verify that your vote did count. But just at DEF CON last year, I think it was an 11-year-old girl hacked the voting machine that they used in Florida within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So every voting machine that they had there that was operational was hackable. So that tells me right there, that is a broken system. Is there a way that we can fix this? Is it some unreconcilable issue? No. There's an easy way with technology to say, if everybody has a unique key and you're the only one that has a password, that's a way that you can have the voting system work.
So
It's
let me
auditable.
let me pose this to you, right? I don't know if you know what's going on in India. So in India, they basically recalled money, certain denominations,
Oh, yeah.
because they were like, we're going to clean up this dark money.
Sure, yeah.
Which to me, it just seems just paradoxical of how much dirty fucking money is over there. But anyway,
right.
it was essentially force poorer people that maybe were stacking cash to have to go to a bank and exchange it.
It's true.
And in order to exchange it, they had to register. And how do they register? Over there, you actually have to register with fingerprints and an iris scan.
Yeah.
So India has the largest iris database in the world. And the reason is because they use it as a second form of authentication for the person. But think about how many rural people live there, right? And so then they're forcing this quote unquote technology on people. And the only thing I really heard was, what are they going to do with that information? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do with the iris scan or how it's going to prevent, like the idea is anything made for good can definitely be used for bad.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think that if people that don't really keep up with this or maybe have questions about it, I think that maybe that's the first wall that they hit is like, but what are you going to do with this? And if we don't know, then we shouldn't do anything because what if? And I think for sure, I know that you're way more risk adverse to say, well, but what are we going to lose?
Sure.
So, and if we lose, how much do we lose compared to what we have? And I think breaking it down like that, then you start, objectively start feeling like, I don't see a lot of downside here. Whatever downside we have isn't worse than what we have. Where I think there's people on the polar opposite end of that, which are just like, look, man, it's not broken. So let's just keep going with what we have until it's really broken. Then we have to. In my mindset, that's too late. It's kind of like, hey, let me not think about cancer until you come and tell me I have cancer. And I'm like, oh, what are we going to do about cancer? It's like, well, maybe there's some things you could have done, right?
Yeah, I think there are preventative things, and I think that, you hit the nail on the head essentially with what you described being a trustless society, right? So I only want to give as much information to make my life easier. I'm not saying be a hermit, live in a shack, and bang out your manifesto on a typewriter, right? I'm essentially saying I want your life to be enriched with technology and not for you to be a product, for you to have all the efficiencies you want, but know that there are going to be big problems coming with the future. where if you're sharing information, if you're not using encryption, we're going to have much harder problems in the very near future that in our trusted society, it starts to break down. So if we start shifting our mindset to saying things like, I want to be secure, I want to protect myself, my data is important to me and need to be auditable, I want to be trackable to me, not for someone else to do those things. I think that if we have that mind shift, we're going to have a better society in the future. I think it's just on the path we are now.
What makes
you
think that? Like I get you believe that.
Sure.
What is it that makes you believe that?
Right. So a good example would be identity theft, right? So that is something that is easy for anyone to get scammed on. I could assume anybody's identity just simply by taking pieces of information about you. Why should that be the case? Why can I go to a company and say, hi, my name is this, here's my address, here's my social security number, all this information that's easy to obtain, and said, hey, give me a card so I can start making charges in this person's name. Why do we live in that society? Why do we have that trusted society? Why wouldn't you flip that mentality and say, I will become my own bank? I will push out a payment rather than letting a credit card number get run up and then I have to go to American Express and say, those weren't my charges, those are fraudulent.
Are you trying to take away my travel points?
I'm saying travel points could still happen. Because then you could have spending bonuses. You can have the same benefits that we have now with twisting the model.
But why would you give those benefits away? That still cuts out the bank, right? So right now the bank negotiates that with the providers, and essentially the bank is trying to say, I'll eat the cost for you to provide this. But remember, there's a partnership, so I'll actually do it with you, and you kind of have to eat a little bit of the cost. So everybody, these made up believe numbers are basically saying, how do I put this? It's like Chuck E. Cheese, right? It's like, hey, you know what? If you put if you play $1 at a time, you got the possibility to get an extra 100 tickets every time you hit that.
Right.
Well, it's funny money. You just made that up.
Agreed. So,
but in my simple mind, I'm like, that's 100 tickets, bro.
It's playing on amazing psychological tricks that these companies aren't dumb. I mean, American Express has very large buildings. They're not a nonprofit. Same thing with Visa and MasterCard. So these travel points that they're giving you, do you think they make money or lose money on those?
Oh, they make, because a couple of missed payments by you and that APR hits. I mean, that's massive.
Sure.
Right? And that's kind of that lost leader that they do. I mean, think about all these poor students that open their first account, maybe don't have a lot of, we don't do a lot of, I mean, I'll personally attest to this. We don't do a lot of financial education for, young adults coming into the workforce to say, hey, this is how financial systems are built. This is what they're looking at. Here's some predatory practices that we know about. Let's explain it to you and why they're predatory so that you could go out there and feel like you're a real wise consumer. Every bank has some sort of like, hey, get a student card.
Sure.
Get it today.
So you could flip it a little bit and you could still have incentives to do certain things. So for example, if you go to a grocery store and you have a frequent buyer program.
No, but I apologize, maybe I didn't make it clear. What I was saying is that you're now cutting out the bank, which is the middle person, and you're going directly to the provider, which they would say, hey, you like to come to Trader Joe's. We love your what's it called? Damn it. When you shop there a lot, I don't know why I can't think of it.
You like to drink the $2 Chuck wine?
Yeah, like your loyalty. There we go. We like that you're a very loyal customer, and we want to reward you for that, right? The idea would be like, hopefully you just keep coming back, or we build ourselves as a brand to you, right? So they would say, we're going to offer you this directly. So next time you come in, hey, we know who you are, Dom, so here's a free coffee. I know that you love the whatever coffee, right? Because they have your data. And they would say, yeah, we know that you buy this a lot. And by the way, here's a coupon for you. Thank you for being our customer. Sounds a lot like how it used to be back in the day, right? When people actually knew your name, came in, the manager would say, hey, you fell on rough times. Don't worry about it. I've seen you come in here a lot. Look, let's, and then you built that, let's call it a relationship, right? With your customer direct. All that went away because now we're, in this, in the model of scales. So it's just massive, right? And it keeps getting smaller and smaller because these companies keep eating up the smaller companies. I mean, a big change happened in 2008 when they allowed these companies to grow even bigger, right? So what you're saying is to decentralize or to go back to like macroeconomics of saying in your area, this could stem and it could change how things are done because people have the capabilities, and now you have the technology that supports you to actually enact these changes, locally, right?
Yeah. So you specifically brought up the concept of kind of cutting out that middleman with Amex, Visa, MasterCard. These companies aren't struggling to get by. They are making tons and tons of money. So you specifically said, well, if you missed a payment, you're going to have to pay that nice fat fee. But that's not where they make all their money, right? They take a percentage, 2 to 3% of every transaction.
No, I mean, you could
for
just
the
go
convenience to be able to use it.
You could go and look at all their fees that you pay for everything, right? Whether it's a wire transaction, whatever it is, right? But I wasn't necessarily saying that. I'm saying that that's from a financial standpoint to say now you're on the hook. You now owe me more than what you thought, so you're going to keep paying me.
Absolutely. So imagine if we flipped that model and we made the Steve card. So the Steve card doesn't have giant buildings. You could select whatever program you want to get like air miles back, whatever negotiated programs that we set up, right? And then we're automating all this with software. So essentially, if in today's technology we had to rebuild a credit card company, could do it with software. Guess what you get? You get a PayPal or a Venmo. Essentially, that's what it is.
Right.
So there's nothing to stop. Again, PayPal makes a lot of money. Venmo being a branch of it. They're making their money on the transaction fees. They don't charge you to have a PayPal account.
So what I keep hearing you say, Dominic, is that you just want to get into the money laundering business, right?
There's money to be made in dirty money, sure.
Well, talk to HSBC about that.
Right. So yeah, I mean, if you flip the model,
some of these people might think that is
of course
because of Silk Road, right?
Mm-hmm.
Completely demonized, taken down. It was supposed to be an open thing. Hey, man, you could go sell whatever you want,
right?
Do it on your own. Well, if you have been sleeping for the past 70 years, it seems like everybody naturally wants to consume some sort of mind-altering substance. Why? Because it comes up over and over and over again, right? Think of prostitution. The same thing is that if it's done correctly, it seems like somebody's willing to give a service, somebody's willing to pay for the service, as long as you can make it transactional and safe. I think everybody's getting what they want. And then you add the question of morality. And then you add on top of that, how do we want to be perceived as a society? Mm-hmm. I just think back to I don't know if it's true, but more of kind of like that trustless society. It's why can't we all just be on the up and up about it? Mm-hmm. Right? This is what we want. This is what we're willing to pay for it. Why do you have to then tell me that it's okay? If it's not hurting anybody else, it's a transactional, meaning it's with me and this other person right now, and it's not going to involve anybody else. I think that it's literally I think that you're kind of trying to, not you, but hopefully everybody else is picking up on it, is that you see that there's kind of this shadow hand over everything. Mm-hmm. And we say, well, we see what you're talking about, but why? And when you start asking that, things start breaking down, especially systems, financial systems. You're like, but why do we need this? Mm-hmm. Right? Why can't I just send money? Sure. And everybody's like, oh, because, so much money laundering would happen. It's like, well, fuck, where's all this fake money at? Like, I would love some, right? Yeah. Why is there so much fake money everywhere? It's the people with the money that have dirty money continue to make it dirty and keep it dirty. And then they have these systems for the ruse. I don't know how else to put it. It's like,
well, it goes back to what I said before with large conglomerates and big corporations and political systems in place. You've got to look at why they're keeping the progress from happening. Someone's making money at it, right? So it's the good example would be the huge push to make marijuana not legal in most states, right? It's like, well, you have the morality piece of it, and growing up in Kentucky as a state which a large percentage of the whole state is dry, you can't buy alcohol. I understand the moral side of it, where they just don't want this to happen, but it's not the Baptists that are paying money to prevent this from happening. It's a larger corporation like tobacco. Right. Until tobacco now starts
the shadow hand is what I'm getting at. Yeah.
And they now get into that industry, and all of a sudden you start seeing it being legalized in other places. So I see that if you look at something if progress is being stopped for some reason, analyze and look at why that is, and then you can evaluate, well, maybe it is for the better of society, right? So it's like we can make the argument about psilocybin mushrooms shouldn't be in that same category as methamphetamines, right? So it's like, okay, we can say maybe we don't want meth to be legal across all the streets, but why wouldn't you allow mushrooms to be sold somewhere if booze is allowed to be sold? So it's like, if you're making a moral argument, then you should make a moral argument across the board.
Well, I think that's where the challenge exists in our society today, is this old, outdated way of looking at morality and ideology and how that should be the thing. It's like an immoral society will now live and exist because we don't have these large barriers of morality to make sure that people stay human. You know what I mean? Like, it just never made sense to me. Is everything's still happening, you just don't see it. People are still doing their crazy shit behind closed doors. Great. It's always going to happen there. But why can't we just destigmatize this idea that everybody chooses to live their life a different way and allow people to live their life? Sure. And by the way, be responsible. And we still have it where drunk drivers kill people, unfortunately. They maybe whatever substance they partake in, they still go out. It's like they're just irresponsible people. It's not something caused them to do that. You could, I can go to the store right now and buy as much alcohol as I want to drown myself in, like die. And nobody's like, oh my God, I can't believe we allow people to buy more than one bottle. I mean, shout out to anybody else, my Costco customer. You can go to Costco all day and see cases of shit go out. And that doesn't bat an eye.
Yep.
Right? I mean, I've seen those, I don't know what they call them, the big
with the
whiskeys.
handle on
Yeah.
it.
Those all day. I saw a person walk out with a box. It was 12 of them in there. I was like, that's crazy that nobody ever is like, whoa. Hey, man, can you tell me what you're going to do with this?
Right.
But yet, whether it be any other substance that maybe they don't agree with, even tobacco, right? You would say, what is this person doing? Right. Why are you walking around with so much? It's like, well, I'm having a party, man. Why?
So the problem I see with it is they have no problem. I say people generally don't have a problem with alcohol and tobacco, except for when you're breaking the laws that are in place, right? So don't drink and drive. Don't smash into somebody with your car. That's breaking the law. When they look at all the other illicit drugs, they put them in this category of, well, if we let cocaine be legal, somebody's going to be breaking in your house to rob you to buy cocaine. Well, breaking in the house is legal.
Do that anyway if they wanted to.
So imagine they're breaking in your house to buy that liter of whiskey. Right. So it's the same argument. So it's like I'm definitely a proponent of decriminalization of all drugs. We've seen it be positively influenced in some countries like Portugal. The Netherlands has had coffee shops where weed and shrooms have been illegal for a long time.
But even they have some wonky ass laws there.
You're going to see people abusing substances in some ways. Absolutely. If you're going to have something like alcohol, which is also a destructive drug, be legal, it's hard to make a moral argument against something like a psychedelic.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to take us down this path, but really what it was is to make the comparison, especially for anybody listening, is that you have to understand that these are still substances. All of them can be abused, but we have, and by we, I mean society has this lens that we use as either ideological or moral, right? Or possibly, well, religion would fall under ideology, right? So we would say, based on those two lenses, if you're making a distinction for somebody else, that's wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It should say,
it's not affecting you. Yeah.
Hey, I don't drink. Thank you for offering me a drink. I'm good, right? Yeah. Thank you for offering me that line of cocaine. I'm good. I don't do that, right? Why can't we take that same approach and say, hey, everybody gets to live the way that they want and everything's on the up and up, as you're saying. Like we don't trust it. So we're saying, hey, what's that white substance? Oh, it's cocaine. I'm like, oh, I'm good. Yeah. But that's not what I want. You're like, oh, you sure? You're like, yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for offering it though. Why can't we just be like that about everything and say, oh, you prefer to drive, right? I drive a little smart car. They would say, oh yeah, you prefer to drive a smart car. Not for me though. Thank you. I would never drive that thing. It's like, all right,
sure,
no worries. But I'm not imposing on you.
Right.
I'm not having the need to say I'm going to stand up for the salvation of anyone. And because remember, everybody has a different religion, so your salvation might be different than somebody else's. But that mentality of instead of holding myself accountable to my rules, I need to impose myself on others. And I see that happen a lot. And I hope that it goes along with what you were talking about, because that's what I see is that if we remove this mentality of I have to do unto others, it's just like, what am I willing to take ownership for? I really think that encryption and everything else, especially everybody listening, would look at that and say, maybe I need to go educate myself. I just listened to this guy with the crazy colored hair talk about all this stuff, and I only knew half of what he said. Great, well then why don't you go look up the other half so you understood the context of what you're bringing up and these ideas that you're trying to share with everyone, right? That's what really comes up for me when we talk about why the change isn't happening as fast as what I believe it should, and hopefully you do too. But those are my ideas as why. Why do you think that some of this stuff is just not taking hold as maybe in the rate that you think it should?
Yeah, at its core, I think what you've described and what you're talking about is freedom, right? So it's a freedom to choose whatever you want. You're not hurting anyone
We have
else.
it in this country. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. We export freedom all the time. I think that brings it full circle back to what I was describing, though, right? So if you are keeping yourself secure, and if that's the technology that's enabling it, or it's the education that is allowing you to leverage whatever the tools are available, that is freedom. It allows you to make choices based on what you want, rather than a nanny state coming to you and saying,
right,
this is what you need to do. If you didn't have anything to hide, why do you need this thing, right? So it's interesting you brought up the drinking and driving piece of it. That is another piece of our society that is completely trusted. We trust that we're going to get in the car, we're driving down the street, and someone in another lane isn't just going to cream into us.
Yep.
It can happen that quickly, but it's something that across the globe, people just trust that this is going to happen, right? So now, while that's fragile and while lots of people die on the roads, that's an example of where it is okay. But imagine if it shifted. Imagine if all the cars could communicate to each other. So now we don't have collisions anymore. And your car is looking out for you. Now you set up a trustless society in the automotive industry. I think that this goes into everything that humans touch. And coming down the pipe, what we're going to see with AI and with robots, we need to understand that there's going to be huge questions that we have to answer morally, ethically, that is going to happen, that if we live in this trusted society, we're going to have huge pitfalls. So I think if we do small shifts now, it can definitely be Archimedes' lever to be able to say, well, what can we do now that seems like a small change that could make a massive impact in the future?
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, right? But I'm also a big believer of the agile methodology, which is change, iterate, change, iterate, change, iterate. And I don't see how else we as a society can reach the maturity that we need to match our technology if we're not doing that as individual people. And this is kind of like, I've explained this to you, like this kind of the concept of the podcast is to say, how many seeds can we plant with different ideas that people then take and create their own, right? The concept of all this is challenge your thought, challenge your perspective, challenge why you see something in a certain way. Go talk to somebody you disagree with, right? And have a civil conversation. Don't beat that person up. Don't try to get in a fight. Don't get combative, because none of that's needed. What's needed is the opportunity to listen to somebody with maybe an opposing view and say, look, I don't understand. Let's talk about it, because maybe there is some way that I can't understand. Maybe I don't get technology. Great. Well, then could you help me understand what it means in technology speak if X, Y, Z, right? The more that we do that, and the more that somebody has a genuine vested value of saying, you know what? I know you're a good person. I just don't agree with how you see certain things. So let's talk about it, right? I don't see that a lot. I see people truly get in camps and dig their heels in and say, but how do I, this is really how I see it, is how do I create value in my own life if the thing that I find value in is not truly valuable, right? That's a little weird to describe it that way, but a lot of people have ideologies that they subscribe to, and that becomes their sense of value in life.
Sure.
And if you're fundamentally poking at something that could destroy the way that they perceive reality, they're going to fall apart. Right.
And it's an attack on their identity at that point. So,
at least because they identify with that.
Sure. Which can change over time. But essentially when it boils down, we're very simple creatures. We're apes wearing cloth. Right. And we think we're all unique snowflakes, but when you look at like Maslow's hierarchy, we all want the same thing. So that person that's across from you that seems combative, their ideology is at a polar opposite of yours, they're wanting the same thing. So if you approach it from not saying that person's wrong, and I try and do this, and sometimes I fail, sometimes I succeed, but I look at what are they trying to accomplish? They want safety. They want safety for their family. Maybe they're going about it the entirely wrong way, but they're wanting the same things, right? So if we look at that common goal of, all right, I don't agree with your ideology about X, Y, and Z, but I understand where you're coming from. Have you thought about you could accomplish that same thing in this way rather than saying you're wrong, building a wall stupid, you're an idiot, right? So we can look at things as more of a conversation and get to the root of what the person is trying to accomplish, and it's a better conversation. It's a back and forth, and maybe hopefully you can kind of come to some resolution to whatever that issue that you disagree about.
And I hope that that is something that you feel like you've been able to do today. Is that something that you feel like you've been able to speak about your ideas, kind of go into them, really kind of delve into, your mind is one of the minds that I find very interesting because it's just so complex and you're always constantly thinking about things and you're always willing to challenge that one thought that you once had. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's great every time that I get an opportunity to kind of sit down like this and chit chat with you, because to me, that's like the state that most of us hopefully should want to get to, where it's, I have this sense of gratitude and this sense of accomplishment because I understand so much, but yet I also, that same mentality is what humbles me to know, but I have so much more to go.
Oh, sure.
Right. And so having that balance, I feel, is what makes us better human beings, is this idea that, man, I feel so empowered to taking control of my life and gone down this path of learning. And now you're saying, and I put it into practice, and in that path you say, but man, every time I talk to somebody new, I realize that I don't know shit. So maybe there's so much more. So keeping open about that, whereas I feel certain people do kind of feel that their sense of empowerment comes, I think I know so much and that's it. And then they miss that other half, which is, but like, what else do I not know? Mm-hmm. And how am I constantly going to try to keep open to like, but things are changing. We understand things better as time goes along, right? I don't see that in certain people. And I'm hoping that that kind of comes across is you need to have both of those in order for these things to actually take, in my opinion, for these things to take hold of our society. Because how do you do that when we have people that are telling themselves, I don't need to learn anymore?
Sure. Yeah. A learning mind and a skeptic's eye is going to be a benefit for everybody. Some people are better at it than others. I try and strive for progress, not perfection when it comes to those things. As long as I'm moving in a direction, I feel that if I'm constantly learning it will be good for my brain and hopefully good for society. But you're right. There are people that kind of close down, and I think that tends to happen with people as they grow in age. They want to get comfortable with what they're doing. Less reading, less learning, kind of getting in a rut, if you will. But I know some people that were in their 70s and 80s, and they're taking up new skills and learning new things. And guess what? Those are the people that typically live longer. Their brain is sharper for longer. Definitely there's been a lot of studies about neuroplasticity when you're talking about learning new languages at older ages. So yeah, unfortunately, some people choose to shut down, and that's unfortunate, but I think that there are still plenty of skeptics out there. There's a lot of people willing to learn out there, and I like to count myself as one of those people.
I like that, man. So what else did you bring up? Is this everything that we have for today?
That's a lot to cover in one day. So yeah. I think that might be it.
Cool, man. Well, if that's all you have, then I want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can have you on again. Maybe some more stuff comes to mind. I'm sure everybody else would love to hear it. And with that, do you have any like social stuff that you want to pitch, or is it we're just good and we're out?
Yeah, just stay off all the social media. So it'll be better. That way you're not a product anymore. No, I love to share my info. If anybody wants to reach out to me, it's just Dominic@punkrockcto.com.
Nice. And absolutely, one of the few things that I can actually say about this guy that I'm willing to say in public is that this guy's awesome, and he means that. So if you actually do reach out, I'm sure that you'll get a note back, and, just pick his brain, man. This guy's awesome. So thank you so much, man, for coming in and giving us the time. And I appreciate it. With that,
great.
Have a great one, everyone.
Thanks.